Republicans plan to audit the Biden administration and the aid sent to Ukraine when they take control of the House in January. According to Fox News, the administration is now rushing to track down $20 billion it's given to the war-torn country following Russia's invasion in February.
It's been reported that the administration has only inspected about 10% of the 22,000 weapons the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. Senator Rand Paul introduced an amendment to install an inspector general to oversee the spending on Ukraine, but it failed to garner enough support from both Democrats and fellow Republicans. On the House side, Republicans have been vocal about their opposition to approving more funding for Ukraine, something I expect will come up pretty quickly in this new Congress when they're seated. That's a lot of money that we're not maybe sure all of how it's being spent. The weapons we're not keeping track of. And we know there's this long history in other conflicts. Think of all the weapons that eventually ended up in the hands of ISIS or other groups like ISIS, when you're just wholesale shipping them to other countries, because the people who are our allies, they can be our allies 1 minute and then not our allies the next. We were allies, or we were helping, sort of on the same side of Osama bin Laden, right, back decades ago, and then we see how that turned out. So I think that's a very good criticism. Even if right now we want, with all our heart, for Ukraine to repel this invasion, for the invasion to end, for the war to end, we cannot necessarily see the consequences of having exported so many guns and other things to a war-torn, to a conflict-type region of the world.
I mean, it was a very lonely place in the media. February, March, April, May, June, July of last year, saying, hey, where's all this money going? Where are all these weapons going? What is the national interest here? What is the end game for Ukraine? We would ask all of these things and be called a Putin stooge, and I'm sure the Democrats are wiping off, dusting off all of their, these are Putin apologist talking points about Republicans who are asking, where did our $20 billion go? Where did it go? And it's just so crazy to me, Robby. Once again, you're seeing that the left, the Democrats have become the pro-war party, and the Republicans are now the ones who are sort of standing up, a little mealy mouth, but they're getting there and saying, wait a minute, hold on. Like, is this really something we want to be invested in? Is this really where we want to be putting our efforts and our energies? Do we really owe Ukraine a blank check to be fighting? Of course, they're on the right side of this war, but is that what we're supposed to be doing, and to what end and for how long? It's just amazing how Trump scrambled the categories of American political life.
No, absolutely. And on foreign policy, it was starting to, he came along at the right moment. That was starting to scramble itself. I mean, really, throughout the end of the Bush years and then through the Obama years, you had people on both sides. You had very liberal, progressive, anti-war Democrats, or an area where the anti-war faction has often found itself. And then increasingly, you also had these anti-intervention Republicans like Ron Paul and Rand Paul, et cetera, who actually did hearken back to a long history of non-intervention or opposition to foreign entanglements in the Republican Party. Actually, if you think a lot about our wars over the 20th century, many of them were launched or fought or expanded by Democratic presidents. And we might argue some of those wars were necessary. I'm not saying World War II or whatever was a war we needed to involve. I'm not saying it's not a war we shouldn't have involved ourselves in. But a lot of our wars were actually fought by Democratic kind of internationalist Woodrow Wilson type figures, or Lyndon Johnson, or et cetera, and so on and so forth. It was not really until the George W. Bush takeover post 9/11, the consensus scrambling, that neoconservatism became very ascendant, and really only just for 10 years. Now, almost all of the anti-war ideology is in the Republican camp. It's very interesting to see the anti-war segment within the parties themselves. There might be very liberal people who are against this, but they are not represented politically very much now. I mean, we've talked a lot on the show about it, but it was such a clear moment when that very mild letter put forth by the progressive Democratic Congress people saying things I totally agree with. I absolutely agree with everything in that letter. and then they were forced to retract it because the Democratic Party, is so busy giving awards to Zelensky, or having him appear at award shows, or I don't know, having celebrities give their awards to Zelensky. Hold on to my Oscar for me until you win the war, that kind of thing.
And for the side that claims to be on the side of the working class, I mean, I've spoken to so many working class Americans who don't understand why we're giving all of this money away when we have so many struggles and problems here at home that could benefit from this kind of infusion of cash. It's really, really atrocious. And the idea that, okay, fine, let's say we've decided that this is a worthy cause, that we shouldn't then have the right to say, okay, President Zelensky, it's time to find a way to negotiate your way out of this, that we don't have a right, having been the major funders of this, to demand some kind of peaceful negotiation. I find that also to be, and that's something you hear a lot. You hear that from Ukrainians, you hear it from Ukraine's advocates, and you hear it from Ukraine's allies here domestically. You don't have a right to say. It's like, well, it's our money, so we do have a right to say. We do have a right to lay down conditions. And I think that's true of Ukraine. I think that's true of Israel, which now is struggling with a new far-right government. When we are giving aid, when hardworking Americans are contributing to another country, that gives them a right to have a say about what is happening with that money, at least.
Well, and no one will be honest with the American people about what we're doing here. The White House, the Biden administration, could just honestly say, look, we're funding this because we believe that Russia is a serious geopolitical adversary. Vladimir Putin is an enemy. He is bad. We want him to lose power, lose favor, and we're going to continue to fund this opposition to him because it's an important geopolitical goal of ours. But that's not what they're saying. They don't say that. They say, no, we're standing up for human rights, and it's important to intervene and help people who are struggling, et cetera, which doesn't, I think, just for exactly the reason you outlined, is not persuasive to the American people, because many of the American people are suffering. Many of them need help. And there are people suffering all over the globe. There are people worse off. And we've been on every side of every conflict. And so it's not persuasive. The humanitarian element of it is not persuasive. And there are always abuses on both sides of wars. So I think you would really need to make the case that, no, this is for our own security because Russia is a threat to it. And if somebody else is fighting them, good for them, and we're just going to contribute the money, and we're actually getting off easy because we didn't have to send troops. That would be actually honest, but they won't say it.
I think they won't say it because they don't believe it. They know that it's not true. I mean, how can you look at Russia's economy today, and say this country this petrostate presents some kind of, existential threat to the United States? It's obviously farcical. They're in it for, virtue signaling reasons.
No, so I agree with you, but I think they do think that. I think that is their actual motivation here. They don't think it's persuasive, so they're not going to say it.
Right. They believe it, but they don't think they can convince anybody else.
Yep. All right, we got to go. We'll be back with more Rising in just a minute. Stay tuned.